Well, hello, and thank you for joining today's session on AI governance, a practical 90-day plan for responsible adoption. I'm John Halberstadt. I'm here with my teammate, Steve Daniel, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, just directly jump right into today's session. So thank you all for being here today. Today is our AI governance 90-day plan overview. From principles to practice, let's get started with generative AI and how we can put some lightweight governance around your AI use. Lightweight, but also comprehensive in ways that some of you may not think about governance. So my name is John Halberstadt. Again, I'm here with my teammate, Steve Daniel, and we're going to go ahead and go through the agenda and then just jump right in. So today we'll talk a little bit about us, who we are at NDash, Steve and myself, and then more broadly, the organization that we work for. Defining governance. So before we talk about how to implement it, we'll talk a little bit about what governance means to Steve, myself, and to NDash. And again, it may be a little bit different, a little bit bigger, a little bit more significant than some of you who have familiarity with governance in general think of. So we'll define what that is before we jump in. We'll talk about why AI governance matters and some real world AI fails, things that unfortunately are happening today. Some of you may already be familiar with some of these things, but it is the reason behind why Steve and I and the folks at NDash are so passionate about governance is that we're seeing on a daily basis what happens without good governance. We'll go through our 90-day plan. It's a practical framework. Phase one of that plan is explore and align. Phase two is design and prototype. And phase three is to pilot and evaluate. After we go through a high level of what that plan looks like, we'll talk about some common pitfalls to avoid. And then what happens beyond the pilot. So this governance plan is designed to get you and your organization kickstarted within a 90-day range. Once you're finished with that first 90 days, we'll talk high level what Steve and I would suggest folks do after you've successfully implemented this plan and had your first pilot so that you can use this plan and this approach and this framework on an ongoing basis. And then we'll close with moving forward, some practical, tactical steps. As Steve and I like to say, practical, tactical. We want this to be educational, but the real test for Steve and me when we share these sorts of insights, our perspectives, some ideas, is how each of you take those into the world and actually apply them. So I often say I have a generalized allergy to theoretical or purely theoretical. So how do we make this real and not just something that was an interesting use of an hour? So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first, a little bit about us, and Steve and I will talk through this high level, but just so you know who we are, Steve and I work for a company called NDash. Yes, we've named our company after a punctuation, but there's a reason for that. What our name means, what is an NDash? And for those of you who are familiar with ChatGPT and the M-dash, E-M, not E-M, not the same thing, slightly different in some ways, very different in others, but what, and Steve is a co-founder of this company. When Steve and Nick founded it, this name I think is just brilliant, which is it's the connection from A to B, from where you are to where you want to be. So that's what an N-dash is. And that's what we aspire to do, including with sessions like today's. So what do we do at N-dash? Our goal, our intent, the reason for our being is to help folks move from where you are today to where you want to be, hence the N-dash. Current state, future state, where you are, where you want to be. So that's what we do through all of the work that we do. And again, you'll hear me and Steve both use the word comprehensive or holistic, but we really look at solutions not just through technology, not even just through business, but holistic, including a focus on the people. And that is a large part of why we do it. The foundation of this company with Steve and Nick, but also myself, in joining this organization, this passion is that we really want work to be enjoyable. We want folks to enjoy the work that they do, and that's about who we are and what NDash is. So from there, we'll go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, just wanted to hop in really quick. Wanted to say one of our big phrases that we like to use is make work feel better. You can see that in John's background. And basically, we're going at this from the idea that if AI doesn't make work feel better, then something is off, and you need to really think about how you're using it and why. So, yeah, we can proceed.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephen. And absolutely, that really we want to make AI a net positive, not just for the organization, but for the people in the organization. That we only win when everyone wins. So thank you, Steve, for that call out. We'll go ahead and really kick this off. So those of you who are watching this, obviously you've got some interest in what governance is and why we need it. So you likely, if you're watching this, know that there is something that is often missing that's really important in general with how we build and deliver solutions, but specifically with AI, it's just such a different universe right now. So what is governance and why do we need it? So why should you care? Now, I've been doing webinars and training and certified courses on generative AI for a couple of years now. And my not so funny joke, but the sad true joke is that this slide about why should you care gets updated every time I share this information. And so here are just some examples that are within the last year or so. But content generated in the Chicago Sun-Times, AI-generated content that's syndicated, so it goes even beyond that. But that information in a special section had a lot of AI-generated misinformation that, again, not just for that paper, that would be bad enough, but it's syndicated, so it's going elsewhere. Some of you may be familiar with what happened a year or so ago when Google's Gemini first rolled out with the ability to create images. And there were just some incredibly bad, inaccurate historical representations from World War II in this particular example that the tool provided in response to a user asking for historically accurate information. You can see, obviously, that's problematic, especially for folks who don't know that history as of yet. Here's another one that's funny, unless you're Taco Bell or the person building this technology, or even worse, the person who was at the drive-through window. But Taco Bell rethinks their AI drive-through after man orders 18,000 waters. So again, it's funny, but there's real-world impacts when these sorts of things happen. So they're funny, but not in a way that really is truly funny. It's really problematic when you think about the ramifications. Here's another one. Unfortunately, Grok has been in the news a number of times, including lately, for things that are not quite great. So they had a really bad problem with an ongoing series of anti-Semitic posts through their chatbot. There was a close to $200,000 fine by the FTC for an AI tool that was a robot lawyer fined for practicing law, which they were not able to do. Air Canada, in their lying AI chatbot, trying to provide good customer service for their customers, and unfortunately, it was far different than what we would consider to be good service. Airbnb guest has a false 12,000 pound claim using AI. The person created fake images, unfortunately, so that's another misuse. And then this is another one, again, that's funny until you think about what the real world ramifications are. But cops forced to explain why why an AI generated police report claimed that the officer transformed into frog. If you actually read that story, again, it's funny, except if you think about the ramifications for other police reports and what could be happening. So in this one, just so you know, if you haven't read it, to close this funny but not so funny cautionary tale list here, was that there was a Disney movie playing in the background where one of the characters was turned into a frog. That audio was picked up by the responding officer's technology. That audio was processed by AI, and that then was incorporated as part of the transcript. So no bad intent, not really funny when you think about what other things could be happening that aren't clearly this wrong. Think about the little things that could happen in that same sort of scenario. So from there, as I had mentioned, this changes so rapidly that I now have a slide, which is since we last met. So UK police blaming Copilot for intelligence mistake. Again, it invented information, what we call hallucinations. But this was part of a police report, an intelligence report. Can you imagine the ramifications? Because if we don't catch these things, if they look good, if it's not a fraud, but if it's real, this is the type of thing that is probably happening in many cases without governance, and folks don't even know that it's happening. And that's the scary part. It's the stuff you're not aware of. Mentioned Grok being in the news. Unfortunately, Grok only seems to be in the news in bad ways. There's a number of press reports and on Reuters and beyond. This is from the AP, Malaysia taking legal action against the things that were happening with the image generation capabilities that Grok just released and is now not removing, but just putting for paid subscribers. And then, because I don't have time, especially even if we had a couple of hours, here's a summary of just some of the bigger fails that made the news literally in the last month. AI mistaking a clarinet for a gun at a school. Again, imagine the ramifications. Washington Post AI podcasts issues, Amazon and a Fallout recap, and then issues at McDonald's with AI generated commercials. So some of these are not catastrophic, but when we think about the impacts to your organization, we'll talk about things like reputational impact. These are the sorts of things, if you use AI without good governance, there's a lot of really problematic things, including your customer base, your profitability, and your overall reputation. So these are a lot of cautionary tales. And again, unfortunately, this list gets updated every time we have this conversation. So hopefully at this point, we've got your attention in terms of why this is important. That really is the why behind this. That's why Steve and I are so passionate about this. So we'll talk about what is generative AI governance. It's the policies, the processes, and oversight that guide responsible use across an organization. For us, we distill this into a couple of salient pieces. One is policies and principles. Folks need to have clear guidance about how and where they use AI and the overall practice, what that looks like, so that there are safeguards in place that are oriented, again, towards your specific organization and context. Risk management. So when we think about what risk is like, and for those of you who may be familiar with traditional governance and risk management, AI has a lot of implications for traditional risks as well as a bunch of new risks, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But we really need to be thoughtful and holistic in how we approach risk management when we use these powerful tools. And as part of that, of course, there's oversight and accountability. So there needs to be a comprehensive approach where there's clear roles and responsibilities. Even in smaller organizations, you may not have somebody specifically with that title, but there are folks who need to have those roles in your organization about how you, as the people who lead this organization, oversee the use of these tools and have that as part of your structure. Steve, unless you have anything to add, we'll go ahead and continue on to the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the three pillars for us of responsible AI, the first are those policies, the how. And these are the practical guardrails and review processes that help manage risk. We talked about those policies. That's what those policies really are primarily focused on. Secondarily, ethics, the why. So again, as Steve had mentioned, the purpose behind NDESH, why we do what we do. Ethics are incredibly important to us across the board, and I am sure for all of you as well. Ethics are part of governance here, making sure that AI use aligns with your organization's principles and values, including things like fairness, transparency, and impact. And we'll talk about how ethics specifically can be challenging when the use of these tools if there's not good governance in place. And then finally, the who, not the band, the leadership. We need folks such as yourselves, leaders in organizations, to set the tone. Folks will follow what you do far more than what you say. We need folks with positional power to have that clear accountability and foster that culture of responsibility from the top down. Folks need to see how leaders are using and approaching AI, and they'll follow whatever you're doing, for better or for worse.
Yeah, when you really think about AI governance and AI risks and failures, most of them are not going to be technical. They're going to be a failure of leadership or communication that can be controlled for with the right policies and procedures.
Thank you. Absolutely. So with that, that's what governance means to Steve and myself and Ashley. We'll talk about then, what's a practical, pragmatic way that we actually can incorporate a plan. And so if you're Here, because you're saying, I know I need this, but I don't know how to do this, or it's not practical to do it in our organization. We've built a framework that our answer to that is, well, at least take a look at this, because we believe that any organization can incorporate our framework in a lightweight way and have that governance, again, that's based on the reality of not having unlimited time, resources, money, people, et cetera, to do the work. So here's an overview of what that implementation looks like. So we've got a practical readiness framework. And again, what Steve and I will talk about here is that our governance not only is lightweight and able to be implemented fairly quickly, but it also is perhaps a little bit different than what some of you think of as governance. We include things like governance includes focusing AI use on problems that have positive impacts if we address them through the use of AI. So governance is not only using the tools effectively and without bias and those sorts of things wherever possible, but making sure before we do any of this that we say, focus on the right problems that the organization needs to solve, making sure that we've got that executive ownership, and then making sure that there's cultural readiness as well. There's a lot of fear, and understandable fear, from folks who see AI used in their organization. So we'll talk about not underestimating that and how to address it. But cultural readiness is not often thought of from a governance perspective, but it really should be. Secondarily, a flexible data and model strategy, and the gist of this, and I'll let Steve talk through this in a little bit more detail if you'd like, but the idea is we don't have unlimited time, money, or technical resources or expertise, so we want to leverage things that are either free, cheap, and easy to get using. And Steve, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and simplicity is especially important for maintaining like understandability or comprehensibility from your team. So simple three-piece solution is better than like a 17 node agent that you want for, especially for a pilot initial technology AI implementation with practical governance that people can understand and make sense based on what your organization actually needs.
Right, and exactly. And Steve and I, in different sessions, we like to geek out on things like NCP and looking at APIs that are available and building custom solutions and vibe coding and those sorts of things. But what we're talking about here is that we really want to avoid that. We want to use things that are low friction, and that is really including our data, not just the tooling, to make sure that we can get something in place that is low cost, low friction, low effort, high value. And then finally, the third of these three pillars, this one is the one that most of us who have been involved in formal governance before think of, which is acceptable usage policies. We need these. They're an important part of governance, but they're not the only part of governance. And that is something that I think is a little bit different about how Steve and I approach that. Compliance awareness, so there are things that are new in terms of using intellectual property to inform certain aspects of how the tool is used. Those sorts of things, just folks generally didn't have even that opportunity or need or desire before these tools. So there is a new landscape, even for things like existing data. And then trust and transparency, we'll talk a little bit about that, but the nature of how AI works, probabilistic, there are inherent challenges that can't really be fixed, so they have to be managed and mitigated. Steve, if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and go on to our next slide, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, like we talked about cultural readiness, there's also the opposite side of the people not, or your team not being ready, that's just kind of blind enthusiasm. And that's something that you want to look out for as well, because people can go gung-ho, and that's where you really risk sharing private information or, I don't know, like any issues. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, and I think you've alluded to this, so just in closing that, this idea of a slippery slope too, is I used the tool and I got something decent out of it, but wouldn't it be better if I just took this spreadsheet of all of our clients and what their current work is with us, all of their project information or financial information or those sorts of things. The intent behind that was good. There was nothing negative, but that then becomes a bigger problem. And so we really want to safeguard that again with the combination of these three different elements. So a high-level overview of this framework that we'll talk about today. For phase one, again, it's exploring and aligning. We really want to start getting the foundational elements in place and looking for what we should be doing in terms of our focus on AI for an initial pilot, as well as building out the strata and the structure and the foundational elements of our overall governance plan. Phase two is designing and prototyping. And from there, we build upon everything in phase one. Once we've designed our solution, we've prototyped it, we've got access to good data. Then phase three is where we start that pilot. We've got a controlled pilot, low risk, high value, relatively speaking, on both of those. And then we evaluate the pilot. And that in about 90 days for most organizations you can do. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail on what that looks like in subsequent slides, but that's it. So phase one, so Steve and I are going to go through, we don't have enough time in an hour-long webinar. We will be doing 3 or more, but at least 3 subsequent deeper dives, as my ongoing joke that only I laugh at is delve. If you use ChatGPT, the word delve comes up an awful lot more than in normal conversation. So in the spirit of ChatGPT, we will delve into these in subsequent sessions on these webinar Wednesdays. Each one will be a deep dive in that phase. But today we're just going to give you an overview of the entirety of this framework. So the phase one is explore and align. Each of the phases in Steve and my framework that we have here at NDash has 3 work streams or swim lanes or whatever term you'd like to think of that span all of the different phases. So I am a visual thinker. If you think of 30, 60, 90 as your columns, and these 3 swim lanes as your rows, this is the way that we really look at them in sort of a tabular type visualization. The first for all is strategy and alignment. The second is that data and model approach. And then third is risk and change management. So in phase one for exploring and aligning, in strategy and alignment, we identify those use cases, generally tied to operations. We want use cases that are not technical in nature for most companies, unless you are a purely technical company. We really want things that have an operational or business impact. We appoint a sponsor and we create a task force. Those 3 things are happening in strategy and alignment in phase one. Data and model approach, we audit available internal data. We identify relevant external sources where appropriate. And we evaluate large language model LLM tools. This is API based, and for some organizations, it will be the API. For other organizations, depending on your size and needs, you may simply be using any of the chat-based tools. Again, we're not looking for shiny technology. We're looking for high value, low effort, low risk. So if you are doing an integration, things like an API will be part of the things that we start thinking about at that same time. And then in this third parallel stream, starting to draft that acceptable use policy, do some AI capability briefings, and then look at identifying and flagging data zones that we want AI to avoid. There are certain areas where there's just the risk is most likely greater than the reward, and especially out of the gate, wall that stuff off. Just say, we're not touching this, at least for right now, certainly not even thinking about it, because you really want initially to have a quick decision. And these things are in. These things may be never, they may be later, but they're not now, and that's all that we need to know. So for our next slide, we're going to go deep. Again, we don't have enough time to go through all of these things. That's in our more formal 4-hour workshop. But for today, we're going to go through one example in more detail. And again, in subsequent sessions, we'll go through more detail for phase one. But today, we're just going to scratch the surface and show you one of these 9, which is identifying use cases. So in this particular example, and Steve, if you'd like, we can walk through this together, but I'll go ahead if you'd like to narrate some of it. This is a great real-world example of internal HR IT policy resource. So the first step that Steve will talk about is identifying the problem.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight how important phase one is, especially if you already have a problem in mind. It might feel like you could knock this out in a couple of days, but just thinking about how the rest of the pilot hinges on this, it's important to really go through a process to make sure that your solution in mind is the best, or is even one worth considering compared to what your actual needs are for your organization. So that's why it's good to walk through this first by identifying problems, really, where what we did is, this is an example from our own team. We recognized that HR and IT were overwhelmed by repetitive questions, which already exist in our policies and standard operating procedure documents and other documents in our collective space. And a lot of time was being spent with requests from IT and HR for answers that were already out there. So we recognize this as a high value, low risk fit for our initial Gen AI pilot.
Right. And as Steve said, that's what's really important here, is this one was low risk, high value. As part of that, the prioritization process, and Steve alluded to this, feel free to jump in as well. When we did a workshop, we found 4 relevant use cases. But as Steve had mentioned, this was the one that was selected, and it was selected based on the clear efficiency impact, but the available low sensitivity content and that quick implementation path. So again, this is how you can do this in 90 days and actually have something that's useful and usable and valuable. It's by really being aggressive in terms of determining which of those use cases isn't the biggest or the best, but it's the best that you can do quickly. And then from that, and Steve, if you'd like to close us out on this one, the selected pilot.
Yeah, so basically we limited the scope to HR, not HT, a little typo there, and IT policy questions. So this isn't just a general LLM to answer like how I should handle this specific client question. It's not so broad that we don't have control over what type of user experience we get. So we're limiting it to HR and IT questions with our data that's already accessible. And additionally, in that process, before we really nailed down the problem, along with the identify use case in Explore and Align, is select the sponsor and generate relevant documents. So that's we had to select our sponsor so that they could be the lead on those decisions as we made them, and create a charter that listed our goals, the boundaries, and expectations. This was pretty loosely based. When we got into phase 2 is when we really define success metrics and everything like that.
Right, exactly. So the outcome was that validated pilot use case tied to real business needs, and the deliverables, not exhaustive, but as Steve had mentioned, we've got a pilot charter with that information. And the charter is really important. I often say, don't do this, don't throw away the document. But having a charter, the conversation is actually what gets the alignment from all of the individuals involved. So you're all really working and marching in that same direction. So as Steve had mentioned, so here's where we go a little bit deeper, and we'll continue with this example, is designing and prototyping. So for design and prototype, we're gonna, in that bulleted, the bulleted list, the one that is bolded is the one that we'll go deep on. But again, to give you this idea of, for each of these phases, for each of these work streams. And again, they're work streams because the work can be distributed to different roles and individuals within your organization. So strategy and alignment is likely to be working with different folks than the data and model approach folks. So this work can be distributed in some cases to executives or leaders, in others to the technology folks, and then risk and change management. Depending on your organization, that could be a different department or a different group. But anyway, this is a good way to distribute that work without anyone being the solo artist or having it overloaded. But of the things that we'll do in phase 2 across these 3 work streams in that 30-day or so period, for strategy and alignment, defining those success metrics. And we'll go in more detail there on the next slide about how we did that. So we picked something. Let's talk about what success means. And this is just overall good governance, not just AI, but before we start doing something, decide what we want that impact to be and make sure we measure it. Align that pilot to business goals. Again, that's just good governance in general. Any work that we do should have direct connective tissue to any business goals. And develop a communications plan. What Steve and I have seen in so many instances in organizations is not just AI, but specifically AI, but if there's not good organizational change management and communication, it doesn't matter how good anything else is. If folks don't know, or if they're not interacting engaging because of other concerns or poor communication or confusing or problematic communication, none of the rest of it matters. Data and model approach. So in parallel testing the small scale prompts, using low or no code tools. Again, we want the barrier to entry to be nil or as low as possible. And where appropriate, build a working prototype. And again, when we say build a working prototype, that may be something that you build with a quick custom GPT. Steve and I do them all of the time. What prototype means in working, really, again, we care about the outcomes. And
a prototype may just be a workflow that you enforce with your employees or your team or the like, where maybe it's use this tool as it is, and you don't actually build anything other than a process and procedure for your team.
Yeah. So again, and good call out, Steve. I mean, what that looks like, again, when we're checking boxes, we want to check the box that we hit the right intent, which is that we have something that's functional, that is a prototype that we can use for our first pilot as we're rolling out this framework. A framework without anything going through it obviously doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then finally, that risk and change management. So I've talked about that organizational change management. It's really important to start thinking about how we do QA and review loops, making sure, because we know there are lots of issues with AI and the quality of the responses. So we want to preemptively address that, and then have as part of that, have those lightweight evaluation criteria and metrics. So we'll go a little bit deeper on this one. As mentioned, that one bullet point out of those 9. What are our success metrics for project policy guide? So the first is, what are those business impact targets? And Steve had alluded to this, so the HR and IT. So Steve, if you'd like to talk through this one, but we're quantifying it as the important point, right?
So it was important that we already had a way for tracking HR and IT tickets, because we do need, we'll talk about this a little bit pretty soon. We need a baseline. So in order to capture the fact that we've reduced tickets by 15%, that's something that we'll need, and improve our internal service, where we score our employee satisfaction. And
yeah, and for those who aren't familiar with NPS or eNPS, it's just Net Promoter Score. It's a fairly common and standard way to measure customer satisfaction with a very simple question. You can use that with external customers, but in this scenario, we use it with internal customers, our users of this, to track their satisfaction. Also, at the same time, the model quality standards. So there are some what we often would refer to as non-functional criteria. So Steve, I don't know if you'd like to talk through this one in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so we got to expect that the system will be accurate and that it will avoid inaccuracies. So you can count on its information being correct when you go to use it, and that it doesn't take too long. There's not a big lag. So expecting accurate responses, citing most recent policies, delivered within 3 seconds, which isn't super fast, but it's fast enough to save time and save a good amount of time for our HR and IT people.
Right, and great call out. And again, that's one of those things when we start defining this, whether 3 seconds is okay or what our tolerance is, whatever that is going to be specific to your organization. But for us, the important part is having the conversation, and what are those expectations, and what level of risk appetite do you have in that scenario? So those are decisions that the framework will support. They're conversations, though, that you have to have, obviously, because there's so unique context.
If it's customer facing, you might feel like you need something quicker. Also, for the prototype, you might want to have lower standards than for the final product or solution.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. Thanks for truing us back to that, Steve. Is what we're talking about is a pilot. We want a pilot that we can get feedback on as quickly as possible, and then we can decide what we want to do. That's not unique to AI pilots, but certainly that ongoing pattern, we want to think about that MVP, right? Really, what is the thing we can get out there as quickly as possible? From that, as Steve had mentioned, we need to have a baseline that's established. So for us to talk about, and this is not unique to AI again, but in any instance where we want to set a numeric goal, we need to know where we are today. I mean, that is just absolutely essential. So what's our current ticket volume, what's our response times, and what's our current baseline NPS or CSAT or whatever tool you use, whatever that is, but quantify it so that when you implement this, you can compare and see what the impact was. And then finally, governance alignment, that the success metrics after we've established these, so these first three things that Steve and I were talking about, that's great. We need final alignment with the sponsor and the task force that they agree to all of this. They should be part of it, so that should be a non-event. But that is really important from a governance perspective, is that anything we do from the pilot aligns to governance, and that's incorporated, and everything that's going through this governance framework as part of that prioritization process. Really, it's key that pilot and the metrics to assess how well it did or didn't do, that governance is the beginning and the end. So the takeaway on this is that we have a clear definition of valuable. Again, this is not AI specific, but it seems like it's more needed now than ever with AI things. Is it needs to be valuable to the business. It needs to be, or the organization if you're a nonprofit. What's the impact? Does it move the needle? Any Gen AI use should be based on positive organizational impact wherever possible in quantifiable terms. The same standards that we'd have for any other large investment of time, money, and opportunity costs. Steve, anything to add before I move on to the next slide?
Well, I think that's great. Yeah, go ahead.
Very good. Thank you. So 3 out of 3, pilot and evaluate. So as we get into the last 30 days of our 90-day or so cycle, we say 90 days. What we've seen is that in some organizations, you can do some of these things more quickly. In some organizations, it takes a little bit longer. But in terms of rough estimates, this is a plan that can be implemented in those timeframes with all of the things that we've talked about, and do it in a good and effective way. So phase 3 is to pilot and evaluate. So again, those same 3 work streams. For strategy and alignment, we launched that pilot. We start tracking those outcomes. And then that highlighted bullet point that we'll talk about on the next slide to just go deep again, 1 out of 9. That's all we have time for today. But subsequent sessions, if this is interesting to you, sign up for the webinar notifications and follow us. But we'll be doing a deep dive for the next 3 months on each of those phases, 1 webinar per phase. In this one, though, phase 3, we have capture learnings and refining scope. So we'll talk about that. Steve alluded to this in his comments about what we do with that pivot. If we like it, then maybe you have to tweak some criteria and expectations about performance and those sorts of things. So that's what we mean. We'll go a little bit deeper there. In parallel, monitoring that performance from the data and model approach. That middle lane is primarily technical and data, depending on if you do or don't split those in nature. Documenting issues. And then again, as Steve alluded to, so maybe performance wasn't good enough or we like it otherwise. Do we need to do something different from an architectural or technical perspective to make it more performant or whatever the case may be? And again, at the same time, for risk and change management, getting that user feedback, right? These are solutions we're providing so that folks can do their jobs better, more effectively, etc. So we need feedback from those folks, doing some basic compliance checks, and updating policy and controls as need be. Again, we're doing a pilot, and we're not just piloting to see if the solution works. We're also piloting our initial rollout of governance. So we want to evolve our policy and controls as part of that. So from there, capturing learnings and refining scope, pilot findings. So Steve, if you'd like to narrate these, this would be great, and your thoughts here would be welcome.
Sure. Yeah. What we found was strong user adoption. Our team was excited to see that we were using AI in a way that would help them save time and effort and more quickly get the information that they needed. We did recognize that we got approximately 74% accuracy on the simple questions, which was good, but it wasn't as good as we had hoped. So we'll talk about this moving forward. But we also saw that, as I kind of alluded to in the strong adoption, a noticeable improvement in our internal support sentiment based on our team member feedback. So
right. Yeah, that's a win. So those were our pilot findings, and here were some of the qualitative insights. So can you share with us some of the things that you and I found here in terms of the not quantitative, but more qualitative, those conversations with folks.
Yeah. You can see from the points here, clarity and speed was what users appreciated most. There were content gaps that we realized with complex and multi-step questions. So that told us that we needed to train our model on our content a little bit before just having it search through and try to answer complex questions. But it also made our team, especially those who hadn't already built up comfort and familiarity with AI, they more generally are expressing more comfort and satisfaction and hope on what AI can do for us in the future.
Yeah. And I think, although it's not officially part of this webinar and the content here, as Steve, as you were saying that, one of the things I reflected on is wherever possible and practical, especially if you have to choose from two good initial pilot items, the fact that we did this with users for something that benefited those users and the day-to-day work that they really just had problems with today actually hits a lot of really positive notes at the same time, because I'm going to be more comfortable with using these tools if I got to use them in a way that I directly saw for my own personal needs, that it was addressing questions that I had. That's a really good way to get comfort with the tool. So thank you for calling that item out in terms of the observation that you had found in this assessment about expressing the comfort in using those tools. So can you walk us through some of the issues that we found in this process?
I think that these two were related. The restricted finance document was surfaced during a query, and that revealed this permission gap that our governance review flagged. Basically, we had a finance document in the same general area, but in a way that we could have restricted it from the LLM, and our LLM was able to access that and share it with our internal team. So it was good that we tested this internally instead of like our pilot being an external project, but that told us to be a little more strict with our access policies.
Yeah. And so from that, we refined the scope. And so, as you had mentioned before, if you can close us out on this. So based on all of those things, the findings, the insights, the issues that we found, we refined the scope. And what did that look like?
Yeah, like I had just mentioned, we strengthened our access controls, right. And that was an immediate thing. But also, as we thought about scaling, what that would mean for us, if we wanted to scale it out to other policy type questions or company internal chatbot. Expand the curated data set only after these safeguards are validated. So we have other internal documentation that our employees might want to access through our chatbot, but we decided to put a hold on scaling it out to that content until we verify that we test it working with safeguards that prevents things like that finance document surfacing. Monitoring and exception handling, that is one of the ways that we can check for that in real time. Is when documents are surfaced, it can do a review on whether that should be restricted or not, and that helps us know whether or not we're breaking protocols in real time.
Right. And so the decision on this was that we, as Steve alluded to, that we iterate before scaling, informed by that structured evaluation and risk review. So we made some changes before we decided to expand it, and that is a healthy, positive pattern that we suggest is, again, make those corrections, really isolate any risk to the extent that you can, be really honest and objective about what you found in that pilot. And if that one didn't work out, you can go back and pick another one that may be more appropriate. That happens in pilots. But in this one, it actually did work out well. We just had to iterate a little bit more and make those the refinements in scope and beyond, as Steve had mentioned. And then to continue, what a great solution for team members, what a great use of AI, low cost, high impact. So as we get close to the tail end of today's session, we'll talk about some ideas that Steve and I have, some things that we would suggest in terms of moving forward and next steps in getting started. So among them, really finding that champion And obviously, generative AI these days is in the news, in all of the news, in ways good and bad. But there is a lot, I think, of interest and appetite and curiosity, especially at the executive level. There are a lot of great applications that AI can be applied to. And so folks, a lot of my background is in the technology executive area, but also for operations, finance, presidents, founders, whomever that may be in your organization. They're already thinking about where AI might be a good solution. They don't have those answers in a lot of cases, or they might, but if you partner up, or if you are one of those people, partner up with others. We really, though, within your organization, we need somebody with positional power who is that champion. Positional power, like it, hate it, somewhere in the middle, it still matters, especially people who have budgetary control, because some of these things aren't going to be free. But more important than that, we want somebody who has the ability to make these decisions and to be able to really sponsor, in every sense of that word, this effort. You don't want to DIY this. That really is something that we would recommend against. You need organizational support, but start with that one person who is passionate, curious, sees the value of it or the potential value, and work with them to become the sponsor. And you may also, as part of that, your obligation in working with that sponsor is to help get them educated with things such as this, so they understand that we are looking at AI through the lens of better business and organizational management and traditional governance. The more that they understand that it's a expansion of those traditional ideas, the more that I think you will have a lot of enthusiastic executive level support. But that is a non-negotiable. You need somebody with an executive hat to be an active sponsor. They can't just be supporters. They need to be active and advocates. So, Steve, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that. I just don't think I can overstate it.
Yeah, I think finding the right person, or this kind of leans into the next step, assembling your team, which sometimes you might realize that one person in charge doesn't have the capacity to build this cross-functional team. So it might be that you have a champion, and then he has to delegate some of the work to building that cross-functional team. At minimum, if you have these departments, you need someone with legal, special expertise, IT, data, because this is going to be in your systems. And
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so whichever executive who can help sponsor this, again, that may be a COO, CIO, CFO, CTO, whatever that is. Maybe it's a director level, but somebody with that positional power, and generally with P&L, some level of P&L ownership. But as Steve had mentioned, depending on who he or she is at that executive level, assemble that task force. So you may not have in-house legal counsel. A lot of organizations don't, especially small and medium-sized businesses. But you want somebody who can represent from a legal perspective, even if that's outside counsel, because there's a lot of, especially in highly regulated industries, finance, healthcare, etc. Any use of AI, you really want to make sure you've got some professional guidance from a legal perspective. IT and data, as Steve had said. So some organizations blend those two together, others split out data and IT. Either way, though, there's an IT component, there's a data component. And so representatives there, especially if you're dealing with a lot of confidential or proprietary data, really want to have folks who are involved from those areas of the organization. And then lastly, this has one key business unit. This may just be semantics. When we talk about business, though, we mean organizational. So if you're a nonprofit, business unit still, though, could be fundraising, could be marketing, whatever the case may be. But we're solving problems through technology, but we're not trying to solve technology problems. What we're trying to do is to make the organization more efficient, effective, impactful for those top line organizational metrics: revenue retention, revenue generation, quality, CSAT, those sorts of traditional organizational metrics. those are the ones that this gets after. We're not trying to chase different AI metrics. We're chasing organizational impact metrics.
And so that organization might be marketing, but you may end up wanting somebody from finance also, because you're trying to save money on employee time, and you want to have somebody that can track that as well. But you definitely want somebody that's in your marketing department if you're using it to generate marketing copy. So it may be more than one key business unit, like at minimum, we say.
Absolutely. And then finally, scheduling that kickoff. So once you've got your champion and they are really helping lead the group, and also get buy-in at the executive level, can't overstate that. That really is the other reason for having an executive sponsor. Assemble that team, as Steve mentioned. Once you get your sponsor, they're going to have that pull to be able to initiate this and get that team. And once you've got that, schedule that kickoff. So we've got some resources. You can see our QR code up here that you can use free of charge. There's literally and figuratively no strings attached. We're here if you're interested in partnering with us, but you don't need us to do this. The intent behind this is a framework that you can do on your own, and we've provided some free resources if you'd like to roll that out. And that really is, again, helping prioritize. One of the tools that we have available for you to use is a tool to help you with the conversation in your organization about identifying and prioritizing that first AI pilot.
You might recall at the beginning of the presentation, we talked through what that practical readiness framework was. So if you access this recording, you can go back and look at that, because it's basically a list of steps that you want to take to building that readiness framework.
Right. And again, and thank you for that. You certainly can go back and go to our website as well, though, if you'd like to have some tools that will help guide you there. So some common pitfalls to avoid as we're getting close to the end of today's conversation. Some things that Steve and I have seen. So Steve, if you'd like to speak to these, I think that would be great. But some things that we've seen that we really suggest people preemptively avoid.
Yeah, this is a risk. Vendor lock-in is it's really easy to happen with AI products, because once you commit to a subscription, you start to build preferences around the tool you've been using, or you feel limited because you only have used that tool. So just be aware of how many different vendors are out there, and wary before you subscribe to anything, before testing out different choices.
Right, and as part of this idea, some of that's vendor and some of it's beyond. But the other item, Steve, that you would wisely point out is this hidden cost explosion.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're doing a custom built solution without really understanding how scale can impact compute resources, this can really explode on you and impact your bottom line in the opposite fashion than you're going for. So it's really smart to, that's why sometimes it's nice to just use a tool where all the costs are kind of built in. But it depends on what you're looking for and what you need. Data debt trap is the third of these four, and that's if you don't have a solid structure for your existing data, then AI is going to struggle to effectively use that data, and that might make it not really worthwhile to try a pilot until you've really restructured your data in a way that AI can use it. Do you have any other thoughts on that, John?
Yeah. Excuse me. Thank you. Yes. I think you've nailed the main point, but in areas, and this is part of the assessment for us in terms of choosing a pilot, is if we would do a pilot and everything looks great, it's high value, low effort, etc., and then we get to the point, but we've talked about that step about looking at your data. If that data is not of high enough quality, then we certainly will have issues as far as using that as part of the pilot, because it's going to be unreliable. And again, we're going to be aggressive in terms of assessing whether the pilot had a positive impact or not. And if the quality of the data is low, the rest of it really honestly doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good the solution is. If it's if the underlying solution requires data and that data is not of high quality, if it's not representative, if it's all of those traditional data hygiene type questions, then that's part of your assessment. So just don't do it. You don't want to build something based upon a faulty foundation. And then, as Steve had mentioned, out of the four, so the last one, pilot purgatory.
Yeah, that's that can happen really easily if you are stuck getting your pilot exactly the way you want it. You can't move outside of fixing the immediate issue. Once you have gone through a couple iterations to try to get it to ready to scale, you might need to take a step back and think about, okay, are there any other applications we should try a pilot for, or kind of resurface the entire step or phased process. If this pilot isn't working, you don't have to stay like attached to the one that's failing. It's good to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So and a great point. So you don't. The point of a pilot is that you can pivot, like with any MVP. That's not unique to AI, but more pervasive here. To Steve's point, if that pilot was good, you could not only make it scale better, but you could expand the scope of it as part of that next step, as any good product manager, product leader would do. But the other thing that's happening with AI pilots, not unique to AI, but I see it here, I think Steve and I see it far more often than I've ever seen it before, is that people do a pilot, they do the victory lap, pop the champagne corks, use whatever metaphor you like most. And you have a pilot and it's successful, and it just stays a pilot. So pilots are designed to be a quick way to get to the end of the first part, but they're not intended to be the end of everything. So don't just get stuck and celebrate the pilots. You're really looking at organizational impacts, and we want to expand past the pilot. Pilots required, but post-pilot is equally important. And equally, though, as Steve had pointed out, and I captured in this note, like hasty ad hoc approaches are as dangerous as not adapting at all. So this framework really can help you avoid those traps. So we're getting really close to time. Some principles for success. The first is, narrow the scope and have that fast learning. So we really, again, want to focus on those quick return on investment or insights and build that momentum. We want to balance innovation and control. So we want to move fast. We want innovation, but this is governance, and we really want to make sure that we're doing that properly. So we have to balance those things. And again, that's going to be really organizational and context specific. Using external capabilities. So as we'd alluded to and referenced earlier, foundational models, just the off-the-shelf type solutions of foundational models doesn't mean anything to you. That's totally okay. But use tools that are available and ubiquitous, not proprietary, and don't DIY it just yet. That's maybe someday you need to do that, but maybe someday are the operative words in that sentence. Right now, you don't need to. So for all of the right reasons, use external capabilities. And then finally, build towards scalability. So while some pilots will be disposable, we really want to, as Steve had mentioned, like if one of these things works really well, except at the last, we figure out that 3 seconds is not enough, it needs to be sub-second. Great. Now then we can start addressing that. That may be architectural, it may be other tuning. So anyway, we're getting really close to the end of the hour, but we're getting pretty close to done. So beyond the pilot, some things that Steve and I just can't overemphasize. The first I've mentioned before a few times, change management or organizational change management, OCM, to those of you who are ProSci certified or otherwise. Change management is generally underappreciated in general, but specifically for AI, there's a lot of change, as we mentioned as we started this. So for people, so change management, communication, training, etc., is incredibly important. Can't overstate it, non-negotiable. And then again, measurement and evaluation. So we're business people, right? Even if we're in a nonprofit, we're mission oriented, but we're looking at bottom line metrics, or we should be. So we need to constantly measure and evaluate as just a good business practice to assess in quantitative organizational impact terms if the things that we want this technology to do to benefit our organization, are those things happening? And if you'd like help on your journey as we get to the 12:59 point on the clock. So again, this framework is useful and usable. Anyone can use it. You don't need us at Endash to do that. However, if you'd like to talk more about it, if you might be interested in some of our support and help in rolling this out for your organization, you just want to talk a little bit more, here's a QR code. These are some of the things that we do. Our website will give you some more information there. And with that, we are at time. I want to just say thank you on behalf of Steve and myself for everyone joining. It really was great to be able to share this with you. And again, please follow us, connect with us on LinkedIn, any Q&A, and follow us so that you also can join our next few webinars if you want to go deeper on all of this. Steve, I'll let you have the last words here.
Thanks everyone for joining. Really great having you. Remember, governance isn't an excuse to delay or restrict innovation. It really is a way to remove ambiguity and get people on the same page. So that's a takeaway from this that I think you should keep in mind. It shouldn't be preventing innovation. It should be helping you move forward with innovation. Thanks.
Wonderful.